You might want to grab a coffee for this one. Just a quick introduction before we get stuck in. My name is Michael. I am the Digital Analytics Director at Glometrics. Glometrics is a Google Marketing Platform certified partner. We're certified in all of the core products, so Google Analytics, Looker Studio, Tag Manager, Google Ads. We are based in Belfast, Northern Ireland. We also have an office in Dublin, Ireland. If you're watching this video on glometrics.com in our resource hub, then you might already be familiar with me. It also means that you're getting first access to this content. If you find this video on YouTube, then you're probably watching it at least a couple of weeks after it was originally recorded. Please do feel free to go across to glometrics.com and sign up for an account on our resource hub. It means you'll have early access to these videos before they go on YouTube. So yes, please do sign up there so that you get first dibs on this type of content and keep up to date. All right, cool. Now let's get stuck into the fun topic of the day, which is Consent Mode version 2. First things first, what is it? We'll talk a little bit more about it in detail in a second, but you have probably heard about it recently because Google announced in the last few months that in order to continue to remarket and to use personalized ads on Google Ads, you will have to ensure that you have Consent Mode version 2 enabled. Otherwise, you will find that over time your audiences will get smaller and smaller and will no longer work. So if you do run Google Ads and you do specifically remarketing personalized ads, then it is really important that you have Consent Mode set up. The deadline is March 2024. So pretty much anytime now. You might find that you will run into difficulties if you have not got Consent Mode enabled. So it's really important that you get this set up as soon as you can, so that you have no negative impact on your ads performance. What is Consent Mode? This is from Google's official documentation. Consent Mode lets you communicate your user's cookie or app identifier consent status to Google. The tags will adjust their behavior and respect users' choices. Consent Mode receives your user's consent choices from your cookie banner and dynamically adapts the behavior of analytics, ads, and third-party tags that create or read cookies. So tags with built-in support for Consent Mode. So your Google tag, your Google Analytics, Google Ads, Floodlight, Conversion Linker. First thing to point out here is that it is specifically only related to Google products and Google tags. It's nothing to do with any other sort of pixels that you might have on your website, your Facebook, your TikTok, your LinkedIn, any of that stuff. Not relevant for Consent Mode. Consent Mode is very much a Google thing at this point in time. So essentially what they're saying here is that it will adjust the behavior of tags based on users' consent choices. Let's dig in a little bit more on what that actually means and the differences between basic Consent Mode and advanced Consent Mode. Consent Mode as a concept has been around for a little while. And actually, whenever it first came out, the advanced Consent Mode was really the first Consent Mode that came out. Basic Consent Mode, in short, essentially allows you to control the behavior of tags if a user consents. Basic Consent Mode allows you to send those consent states to Google so that they can then use the data that comes from that user accordingly. So if a user consents to ads, Google Ads, personalization, and so on, it gives them that consent to do that. But with basic Consent Mode, if a user does not consent, then no data gets sent to Google at all. Your tags get completely blocked. And that's that. You might already be managing user consent in a similar way through a consent management platform, a cookie banner, a tool such as OneTrust, for example, or Cookiebot. So you might already be blocking tags if a user does not consent. In which case you have effectively created your own sort of version of basic Consent Mode. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're sending the appropriate consent states to Google, specifically for the new version, version 2, which means that you have to send these consent states to Google if you want to continue to run personalized ads or remarketing. Advanced Consent Mode, as I said, it was kind of the original version of Consent Mode. It allowed you to continue to track users who had not actively consented to cookies by sending cookieless pings to Google. So it meant that whether a user accepted or denied from your cookie banner, you were still sending data to Google regardless. You were sending cookieless pings for the non-consented users, and you were sending data as per usual for the consented users. What that did then, it allowed you to model the behavior of those non-consented users. It allowed Google to effectively fill in the gaps of the data collection for you, because with basic consent mode, or if you were manually blocking tags from firing for non-consented users, that means that you're losing out on some data. So the original purpose of the consent mode, or the advanced consent mode, was to help fill in the gaps in data collection for non-consented users, by filling in the gaps using modeling that Google would do for you based on those cookieless pings. On each of these slides, I've also listed the link where I have got this information from. If you want to go and read it in your own time, I will also pop all of the links in the description below. So this slide sort of explains it in a slightly more visual manner, the differences between the basic consent mode and the advanced consent mode. I wanted to point out at this point as well that the new version, so version 2 specifically, what was new about version 2 was the two new identifiers, so add personalization and add user data. Those were two additional consent states that were added to consent mode specifically for version 2. Specifically, these are the ones that you have to have configured and enabled for your Google Ads tags. In order for you to continue to use remarketing, personalized advertising, you have to be sending the consent states to Google for these particular types. So as I said, if a user consents, you have to send the granted status for add personalization and add user data in order to remarket and to advertise to those users. If Google does not receive those consent states for that particular user, then that user will not be advertised to. I think this is quite a good overview of how the three different versions of consent mode work in general. So, or the three different consent states. So if consent is granted, everything will be sent to Google, everything will work as normal. Your Google Analytics will continue to read and write cookies and track users as normal. Your Google Ads will be able to read and write cookies and track as normal. The ad personalization, all that good stuff will be sent to Google for targeting purposes as normal. You can see the difference here. There is quite a core difference between advanced mode and basic mode. Basic mode essentially means that if a user denies consent, no tags are activated, no analytics data is collected, no information is collected or sent to Google Ads for advertising purposes. That user essentially you're just not collecting anything about that user. With advanced mode, and I've intentionally colored this in gray because it is a little bit of a gray area in terms of the implications of configuring advanced consent mode. If you are based in the EU, for example, if you're based in Europe and you are responsible for making sure that you're compliant with data privacy regulations, then I think you have to think very carefully before you implement advanced consent mode. As I said, with advanced consent mode, you are effectively continuing to track users who have declined cookies from your cookie banner. They have declined tracking from your consent banner. You are still tracking them with advanced consent mode, but you're using cookieless pings for modeling purposes. As you can see here, the analytics tags won't read or write cookies, but they will send cookieless pings for modeling. Your ad tags will send cookieless pings for conversion modeling for your ads, but those users won't be targeted. They won't be targeted for personalization purposes, or personalized advertising won't be sent to them. So as I said, a little bit of a gray area. You want to make sure that if you do think this is worth the effort, that you should consult your legal teams. Make sure your cookie banners, your privacy policies, all those things are up to date to make sure that you are explicit with what you're doing with that data and the data that you're collecting. It's really up to you as to whether you think it's worth going down this route. For the purpose of Consent Mode V2 and for the purpose of ensuring that your Google Ads continue to function as previously, the only thing that you need to do at this time is the basic consent mode, is just to make sure that you're sending the ad personalization and ad user data granted statuses to Google so that those users can continue to see your personalized ads, your remarketing ads. Just to talk a little bit more about that advanced consent mode modeling, as I said, it's a little bit of a grey area whether you think it's appropriate to continue down this road. I wanted to talk a little bit about the how it works and the advantages to it and what you will potentially get from it as a benefit. So what do those cookieless pings look like, first of all? So there are a variety of different cookieless pings. There are consent state pings, conversion pings, Google Analytics pings, and those pings may include things like the timestamp, the user agent, the referrer. Also, lots of aggregate non-identifying information around where the user came from, what they did, that sort of thing. As I said, link at the bottom here. You can go and read this in your own time and decide for yourself as to whether you think this is acceptable from a legal standpoint, from a privacy standpoint, from a GDPR standpoint, if your customers are primarily in Europe. Your mileage may vary on this, whether you think it's okay to do this or not, and that is entirely your choice as to whether you decide to go down this route. What is the benefit of it? So what does the Google Ads consent modeling look like? One thing I think is really important to note off the bat is that you have to have a daily ad click threshold of at least 700 ad clicks per day over a 7-day period. And that needs to sort of be an ongoing thing. It can't just be a one-off. You've got to sort of consistently be at that level, more or less, in order for the modeling to kick in Google Ads. So it means that you've got to be spending quite a bit of money to see any sort of merit or any sort of value in going with the advanced consent mode, because if you don't hit these thresholds, then your data will not be modeled anyway. So I think that's something really important to consider before you go down that route, especially as we said, there is potentially a grey area as to whether it's the right way to go for your users. So I think it's really important to make sure that you are hitting these thresholds before you even think about it. If you're not hitting the thresholds, then there's no point even going down that route. If you do decide to go down that route, so if you do hit those thresholds and you do see value in continuing with advanced consent mode, here's sort of what the modeling does. Here's what it looks like. Just a really basic example here, and again, this is taken from Google support section. If you get 1,000 ad clicks, let's say half of those are from consented users, half of them are consented clicks, half of them are unconsented. Of those 500 that consent, you might have 50 consented conversions. At that point, if you just had the standard basic Google Ads set up, you would see a 5% conversion rate there. You would see 50 conversions from 1,000 ad clicks. With consent mode enabled, you may see an additional 9 conversions from those unconsented users. Essentially, if a user does not consent to being tracked, they are also less likely to convert. So what you'll see here is maybe you'll see another 9 unconsented conversions from those 500 unconsented clicks that we had no visibility of previously without the advanced consent mode. What that means then is you've then got 59 conversions out of that 1,000 ad clicks, which means that your conversion rate has increased from 5% to 5.9%. And that is a 18% uplift in your conversion rate, which sounds great, right? It sounds like you're getting lots more conversions. But it's important to remember that this does not mean that you're getting an extra 9 conversions. It does not mean that your conversions have increased by 18%. The number of conversions that you've got, the number of actual sales, if you're an e-commerce website, haven't actually changed. This just means that you have 18% more visibility of Google Ads conversions. So Google Ads will get 18% more credit for the sales that have been generated overall on your website. But it's important to note here that by setting up advanced consent mode, it doesn't mean that you're getting more conversions. It means that Google Ads can be attributed with additional conversions. Very distinct difference between the two things. I think that's really important as well because obviously it's good for Google because it makes Google Ads look more successful. Obviously it's good for Google because the more data they get, the better the algorithms can be for things like Performance Max, for powering those campaigns. And in the long run, that is also going to benefit you as well, because the more data that is used in the background for the algorithms, the better the result will be. So in the long term, it will probably benefit you as well. It's also going to look better for whoever is responsible for your Google Ads campaigns. So you will probably find a lot of different people will push for you to set up advanced consent mode. And as I said, there are pros and cons to it, but it's just really, really important that you consider the legal impacts to make sure that you have all of your policies and all of your different ducks in a row before you go down this route. It's not a trivial thing to set up. It's something that you really need to think about from a legal perspective if you are in the EU in particular. If GDPR is really important in your part of the world, then I would certainly think about it before jumping in feet first. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. That's how the modeling works for Google Ads. You will obviously see more observed conversions, not necessarily more conversions. You certainly won't be seeing more sales on your site, but Google Ads will be taking more credit for those sales. So just something to bear in mind as to how that works. GA4 is sort of a similar story. As I said, the main purpose of this is really to try and fill in the gaps for your data collection for those users that do not consent from your cookie banners. So kind of same idea. It's just filling in the gaps in your data collection. Again, some pretty massive prerequisites here. In order for this to be relevant for you, you have to be collecting at least 1,000 events per day from users who have denied analytics storage, so people that have denied consent from your cookie banner, 1,000 events per day on a consistent basis from those users. You also have to have 1,000 daily users who have accepted your cookie banner for at least 7 of the last 28 days. So you pretty much have to have at least 1,000 users per day on your site that have consented. And of the users that haven't consented, you have to have 1,000 events per day. So I don't know how many events a user will send on average, but you definitely need to have a significant amount of traffic daily in order to make this worthwhile. As I said, for Google Ads, if you're not hitting these thresholds, then there is no point even thinking about advanced consent mode because it will do nothing to your data. It's not until you start hitting these thresholds that any sort of modeling or any of that stuff kicks in. So if you're not hitting those thresholds, then don't even go there, would be my advice on that one. So now that we've looked at the pros and cons of consent mode, advanced and basic, we now know that we need to set up at least version 2, the basic consent mode version 2 for Google Ads if you're running personalized ads or remarketing. How do we actually go about setting up consent mode, either basic or advanced? What are our choices? How do we do it? Let's talk about that a little bit more. Lots of cookie platforms, lots of your consent management platforms have an integration with consent mode already. That'll either be some sort of native integration, or they may have a tag template within the community gallery in Google Tag Manager, which will send those calls to the consent APIs. So on the screen here, there is a list of all of the cookie banners or consent management platforms that have some kind of built-in integration or native integration that will make life easier. So some of the most popular ones there, we use OneTrust a lot. That's the one that I will show you an example of in the upcoming section of the video. But there's lots of other ones there as well. So depending on which one you have on your website, you may choose to go with a different one, or you may already have a different one in place. But if the one that you use is on this list, that will certainly make your life a lot easier. As before, the link is at the bottom of the slide. I'll also put it in the description of the video, so you'll have access to all of this information. The other option is to do it yourself through Google Tag Manager. There is a really great tag template within the community gallery from Simo. If you're not familiar with Simo Hava, he is the go-to for anything Google Tag Manager online. Check out his blog, simohava.com. Lots of amazing content on there, really useful guides, how-tos, really in-depth technical information in there. So 100% recommend that. Super useful. He's also built some tag templates, and this is one that we have used for our setup. It allows you to set up consent mode, integrate it with your cookie banner, rather than using any of the other sort of cookie banner integrations that we mentioned on the previous section. You can do it using these tags instead. That's how we've done it on our website. So I will show you in the real world how that works in the next section. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen now. This is our Google Tag Manager container. This is where we set up consent mode. So you can see here we've got two different consent mode tags here. We've got our default and we've got our updated consent tag. Let's go back a step. Let's walk through how our cookie banner links to GTM and how we actually can tell whether users consented or not. So let's go into preview mode. Let's do some debugging, and I will pick out the important stuff for you and walk you through it. Obviously, your website may well be different than ours. As I said, we use OneTrust as our cookie banner. OneTrust sends data to the data layer based on the user's selections. So let me show you how we can access that information. In Google Tag Manager, you will see over here, so you see lots of different bits and pieces. These are all the different events that have occurred on the site since I've loaded my browser. If I go to this one, OneTrust scripts updated, that is something that OneTrust pushes dynamically, pushes itself through to the site. And we check the data layer here. You can see here we've got our OneTrust active grips at the bottom, 01, 02, 04. 02 for us is analytics consent, and 04 for us is marketing consent. So this means that at some point in a previous session, I have consented to both analytics and marketing on our website. So we can use that information. That's really useful for us. This allows us to then set our consent states for consent mode. So how do we do that? How do we access this information? First of all, in Google Tag Manager, we have to create variables to collect that data. So if I go down to the bottom here, you'll see we have a data layer variable called OneTrust active grips. And I've just named it exactly the same as the actual variable in the data layer here. This means that we can see that information in a variable. And again, if I scroll down my variables, you'll see it here, OneTrust active grips, C01, 02, 04. So that's the first thing that we need to do. We need to be able to access those consent states from our cookie banner. You can see here, because we use OneTrust, we can use this OneTrust active grips data layer variable. I've shown you how to set up the variable itself in Tag Manager. That will then expose this information in Tag Manager that we can work with. For consent mode, the first thing we want to do is set up a default on all pages. So with Symos tag, we have set the consent command as default. We then set all of our different consent states that Google requires values for. So add storage, analytics storage, add user data, add personalization, personalization storage, functionality storage, security storage. We want to set all of those as denied when the page first loads, because we want to make sure that we are waiting for consent before we transmit any data anywhere. Before we send any signals to Google, before we send any hits to Google, we want to make sure that the consent statuses are up to date. So the first thing that we do is set up this tag that sets the default, which will be denied by default across the board. We add the consent initialization trigger to this one, so it's the first thing that loads in when Tag Manager loads. The next thing we want to do is update those consent states whenever the OneTrust grips are updated. So once OneTrust has had time to pass that information to the data layer, so it's accessible in Google Tag Manager, so it's accessible by the site so that we can use it for our tags. We have an event here called OneTrust grips updated. So once that's there, we can then see these consent states. We then have to translate those into the accepted values of the Google consent mode. So the accepted values there are granted or denied. So what we do is we translate that variable that we set up, so the OneTrust active grips, we translate that into something that we can use within our consent mode tag. So for analytics, we create a lookup table or a regular expression table. If analytics has been granted, we know that there will be a number 2 in the value, because OneTrust active grip C0002 was analytics allowed. So if there's a 2 in this variable, then we output granted as this new variable. If there is no 2, then we set it as denied. We do the same thing for marketing. except this time we're looking for a 4, because as I said earlier, if I have accepted marketing from our cookie banner, again, your cookie banner might be different, but in our cookie banner, there will be a value there that's got a 4 in it. I output that as granted if there's a 4, otherwise it's denied. So now we have 2 different new variables. We've got analytic granted, we've got marketing granted, that we can then use to update our consent status in another tag. So as I said, we set the default whenever the page first loads. We then have to update those consent states when OneTrust group's updated. That's our trigger. We know that's our right trigger because it comes in here as an event. That's when we've got access to the consent states. So this is fine for the trigger for our updating consent mode states tag. You can see in the tag this time, our consent command is update. We've then used the new variables that we created, so marketing granted, analytics granted, and we have put those in the appropriate slots here. So if the user has consented to marketing, this will be granted. If the user has rejected analytics, for example, this will be denied, and so on. So whatever the user has selected from our cookie banner will be dynamically populated here in the relevant places across all of these different slots here. One important point here as well, for this one, we really do have to tick the push data layer event box. This means that we'll have an additional event that will be fired into the data layer with GTM consent underscore update. That is then the event that we're going to use for our Google tags. So we've set a default to be denied. Our OneTrust is loaded in with the OneTrust groups updated event, which has updated our consent states. We've translated those into granted or denied so that they will be in the format that Google wants them in for consent mode. We've then set this update tag up to update those consent states. The final thing we need to do then is update our Google tags so that we're using this new event, GTM consent update, as the trigger for those Google tags. So let's find our Google tags as an example. So you can see here our Google tag, we use GTM consent update as our trigger. I'll also show you our Google Ads tags. Again, Google Ads for remarketing, we have GTM consent update as the trigger there as well. So that's it. That's how we've set up consent mode on our website. One final thing I wanted to show you as well before I go is how do you actually see if it's working. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. We'll go back into debug mode here first of all. Let's go and look at our hits that are being sent to Google Analytics. You can see here the consent state. G111 means that consent has been granted. If this is G100, that means that consent has not been granted. That means that it's a cookieless ping that's been sent to Google. So if you've set up advanced consent mode, that might be okay. If you have not intended to set up advanced consent mode and you don't see this, then you might want to double check your setup. That's one way to check, is to check the hits within Tag Assistant. Another really good way to check, this is something that Google have introduced recently, is within the Google Analytics interface. If you go into your admin section and you look under data streams, there will be a section here for consent settings, and it will tell you ads measurement consent signals active, ads personalization consent signals active. If you see this in Google Analytics in your GA4 account, then this is a confirmation that you have everything in order for Google Ads to continue to do remarketing and personalization. Within Google Ads as well, you can also check there. If you go into your Google Ads account, you go to newsletter subscriptions or whatever your conversions might be, click into the actual conversion itself. You can click on diagnostics, and then again it will show you here your consent mode status. So consent mode is implemented, modeling will be active when click thresholds are met. So you can see here we have got consent mode set up. It's active in Google Analytics, it's active in Google Ads, and that confirms that we have everything in place for our remarketing, our personalization, the consent mode version 2. The requirements are in place for us to continue to advertise to people successfully. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how we've set it up. Obviously, As I said, there are many different ways to set up consent mode depending on your cookie banner, depending on whether you want to use some of the built-in integrations, whether you want to use Symbo's tags in Tag Manager, or do it yourself in some other way. But those are the main ways to check that you've got it set up and working correctly. Is to check your Google Ads, go into the individual conversions, check the diagnostics tab, go into GA4, check under your data streams. There should be a section there. If you don't see that section yet, it might be just because it hasn't rolled out to your account yet. It's only come out in the last few weeks, so there is a chance it might not be there yet. But that's where you would check to make sure that you have it set up properly. That was just a quick overview of consent mode. Hopefully you find that information useful. If you have any questions about consent mode, if you need a hand with anything, if it's a quick query, I'm happy to help via email. If you would like us to help you get consent mode set up or any sort of analytics projects, please do get in touch and we can talk about it. That's it from me. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to sign up for the Resource Hub on glometrics.com to get first access to these types of videos. See you on the next one.